It's a great joy to begin this session here in this beautiful location in Denver. We're going to look at today what the church says about electronic media, when it began to write about it, teach about it, and what it particularly calls religious communities to do in response to what it's teaching. The church's teachings are in three different phases. The first phase really begins around 1930. Pope Pius XI briefly introduced the theme of the necessity of an extended and careful vigilance about the cinema, about the radio, and how these new media can be a great utility for instruction and education when they're directed by sound principles. But on the other hand, he also noticed that they are too often used as an incentive for greed and unruly passions. This is in 1930. But in 1931, he founded Vatican Radio. And at that point, he gave a broadcast to all the nations and to every creature. But in the same broadcast, he advised them to also be careful and have extended vigilance about the media. So we see beginning already these two sides of it, the great gift of it to proclaim Jesus Christ throughout the world, but also the fact that it can be used for bad reasons. In 1932, just 1 year after the Vatican Radio was founded, the Daughters of St. Paul, one of our CMSWR communities, made their first foundation in the United States, although they began in Italy in 1915. And they did it for the purpose to proclaim Christ the Master with the means of communication. And they've been doing it ever since. And so in an extraordinary way, we could say that one of our CMSWR communities is right there at the forefront of extending the media throughout the world. In 1936, Pope Pius XI actually then wrote a whole encyclical, and it's called, in translation, with Vigilant eye, Vigilanti Cura. And he also, in this encyclical, it was all about looking at cinema and how cinema was opening up a whole new world for the faithful. He founded the Legion of Decency. That was a legion that someone could join in order to actually work towards and only try to watch movies that were decent. And many people, Mother Timothy, one of our sisters, remembers actually signing up for it. And so this was, from the beginning, the church wanted to protect people from danger, but at the same time also wanted to really go forward, be right in the middle of the development of new media. In this encyclical, he describes the fact that good motion pictures can have a wonderful moral influence on those who see them. They can impart better knowledge of history, beauty about the world, truth, understanding among nations, promote the cause of justice, give new life to the claims of virtue, and so on. So these were all the great things in this encyclical that cinema could do. But on the other hand, he said, bad motion pictures are occasions of sin. They seduce young people along the way of evil by glorifying the passions. They show life in a false light, cloud ideals, destroy pure love and respect for marriage and affection for the family. And so we can see right from the beginning the challenge that the church faced when any new media came forward, and it's the same today. In 1950, Pope Pius XII requested publicly a serious study of the media in an address he gave to Catholic journalists in Rome. It's not an exaggeration to say that the future of modern society and the stability of the inner life depend in large part on the maintenance of an equilibrium between the strength of the techniques of communication and the capacity of the individual's own reaction. And we have the same problem today, just different media, but it's the same struggle. Now, Marshall McLuhan, who's a well-known Canadian, heard this, and he had just become a Catholic in 1937, and he was set on fire by Pope Pius XII's request for a serious study of the media. And I will refer throughout some of our sessions to some of his insights, and he spent his whole life on this topic. In 1957, Pope Pius XII wrote an encyclical on the communications field, including motion pictures, radio, and television. And again, he notes this dual influence. The remarkable progress has given rise to great benefits and to great dangers. Just as this media can enlighten us, it can also disfigure us. And so he, at this point, named St. Gabriel the patron of media. He asked in this particular encyclical, and I quote here, members of religious orders and congregations to turn their attention to this new art, to give their active cooperation for true progress for the mind's development, and with the deliberate aim of preserving the common good, unquote. So that ends what I call the first phase of the Church's teaching. Various encyclicals approaching just some of the general problems. But the second phase is quite different. This began with the Second Vatican Council, in my view. I'm naming these phases. In 1963, the Second Vatican Council introduced the outstanding obligation of all the faithful to look at objective moral norms in relation to the media, and states what they are, both in terms of communities and in terms of the self. In 1963, Pope Paul VI issued one of the first 2 decrees of the Council on the media of social communications. So the very second document proclaimed by the Second Council is on the media. That can show you how important the Church in the Second Vatican Council took this topic. And here's what it says, among other things. Moral norms for the media. Information or news should always be true and complete, within the bounds of justice and charity, proper and decent. Art should allow itself always be subservient to the primacy of the objective moral order. The portrayal of moral evil should always reveal and glorify grand dimensions of truth and goodness, unquote. So if you have to show things about bad people, it should always be in the broader context of truth and goodness. This document also recommended the establishment of the Pontifical Council for Social Communications, which was established. And so this is the sort of area, the council, that then, after that time, every year has issued documents. And we'll be looking at a lot of those. In 1965, the Second Vatican Council also issued the decree on up-to-date renewal of religious life. And so our communities have all been deeply affected by that. So that is just 2 years after this other document on the media. Plus, in 71, Pope Paul VI issued an apostolic exhortation on the renewal of religious life. And in 1971, the same year, the Council on Social Communications issued a pastoral instruction, which the Second Vatican Council had requested. It was called Communio et Progressio. And though, as you may know, the Second Vatican Council really looked at the notion of communio, of the Church as a communion of persons in imitation of the 3 divine persons, and really emphasizing how the different vocations are called to serve and support one another. And so what you will see coming forward is, after that time, a real distinction looking at what does the laity do, what should priests do, what should religious do in relation to the media. So this pastoral instruction was issued on the 5th World Communications Day. And here's what it says. In the Christian faith, the unity and brotherhood of man are the chief aims of all communication. And these find their source and model in the central mystery of the eternal communion between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, who live a single divine life, unquote. So you can see why media now is being placed right in the heart of the Trinity. Rather than just saying, be careful, be vigilant, do it for good, it's actually given an ecclesial context for the decisions of people who work in the media and then those of us who use the media. Another wonderful passage from this document: communication is more than the expression of ideas and the indication of emotion. At its most profound level, it is the giving of self in love. Christ's communication was, in fact, spirit and life. Whoever wants to see the media take their allotted place in the history of creation, in the incarnation and redemption, and to consider the morality that governs their use, must have a full and proper understanding of man. So Sister Marisha and I will be doing a lot in this area. How is the human person affected by the media? What's the proper way to understand our identity? And finally, in this document, it also asks religious to become educated in the media. quote, "If students for the priesthood and religious in training wish to be part of the modern life and also to be at all effective in their apostolate, they should know how the media work upon the fabric of society and the techniques for their use. This knowledge should be an integral part of their ordinary education. Indeed, without this knowledge, an effective apostolate is impossible in a society which is increasingly conditioned by the media." Then what happened shortly after this is that religious orders and congregations were asked to give thought to the many pressing tasks of this church in the field of social communications and consider what they themselves can do to fulfill them under their own constitutions. So there's an awareness that each community has its own cares and its own obligation. But we were all asked to look at this question. Their own specialized institutions for social communications should collaborate with one another and keep abreast of the overall pastoral planning in diocesan offices, national, continental, or regional offices, since these are usually the competent bodies for the apostolate of social communications. And then it says national offices and the corresponding central offices of the religious congregations should cooperate with the international organizations for the press, motion pictures, radio, and television. And in the 1970s, Mother Angelica founded EWTN. So she's emerging from this phase of the development. In 1976, she had already recorded 150 audio cassette tapes. 1977, a Chicago TV station began airing her program, and by 1979, she began to build her own cable channel. So that's the second religious community that we would be very affected by, that really responded, took it on as its apostolate. The third phase, then, is from 1979 to 2010. And in this phase, what the church does in all these teachings is take action on a particular media area. And you can see by the titles on the chart that I've made, it's computers, it's internet, it's pornography, it's all of these different things. So that you begin to get focused teachings about a particular area of media. So basically, in the rest of our discussions, Sister Mersh and I will be integrating some of these teachings where it's directly related to the topic we've picked. There still is a very strong sense of this paradoxical dual nature of new media. It continues to be stressed in all the documents. How it ought to be used for good, especially for evangelizing and teaching about the Holy Trinity in the years leading up to the new millennium, and how the church ought to protect persons, families, and society from the use of media for evil. So media at this point, too, in the third phase, is no longer described as just simply a kind of technology, but now as a culture which informs people everywhere in the world. The new media is associated with the dawn of a new era, which calls for prayerful and intelligent responses by religious sisters and by religious institutes everywhere. With increasing urgency, the church begins to enlist persons in complement vocations to form those within their area of responsibility with a critical approach to the new medias. Parents for their children, teachers to form their students, bishops and priests to form their seminarians and parishes, and religious superiors to form their sisters or brothers. And so this is where you can see in the third phase, which is what we're in right now, this is really what has been happening over and over again. Very good. So I'll stop here.